Hi, I'm James Staten with Forrester Research. So good to have you guys here. And we're going to be talking not just about edge computing and not just about 5G. We're going to be talking about innovation and why your organization needs to prioritize it. So with that, let me have my coworkers introduce themselves, and we'll get into the conversation.
Sure. My name is Carlos Katsuya. I am Chief Investment Officer at IFC. IFC is the private arm sector of the World Bank Group. I'm based in Singapore, and I'm responsible for IFC's investments in the telecom sector across Asia Pacific.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm based in Beijing. I'm the Strategy Officer, overseeing the digital infrastructure and technology strategies for Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The bank was set up very similar to IFC and the World Bank Group, that we do mainly investments and fostering investments into infrastructure within the region.
And James Staten, I'm one of the lead analysts on tech-driven innovation at Forrester Research, working with all industries about what kind of innovations are we talking about here and which ones should you be focusing on. And I'll give you some quick views into what these topics are. So a couple things to really understand about innovation research is every company says that they are innovators, but most companies are not. Most companies who call things innovations are digital transformations of their existing products, their existing business models, trying to protect those parts of the businesses and keep them relevant over time. That's not what you should be focusing on. What you want to be focusing on is net new business values that are aligned with what your customers' future needs look like and how you can expand your value to them so that they can see that your organization can actually do more value for them than they have historically thought about your organization. And to really accomplish this, the leading organizations are shifting away from simply being aware of their customers, simply collecting tactical feedback from their customers about what they should do, to becoming customer obsessed. And one of the key aspects of being customer obsessed is looking beyond just what your customers tell you into what your ecosystem is hearing and what third parties are hearing, so you can identify what are the emerging future needs that your customers are facing, what are the challenges that are coming before them, and investing in advanced technologies to figure out how can I address these identified needs with new technology-based solutions and capabilities that create net new business values and that we can package with a net new business model that goes with that. And when they make these kinds of moves, the very most effective innovation organizations are looking at how can I not just do innovations myself, but how can I work with startup companies? How can I work with my technology ecosystem partners to identify new technologies and new capabilities and build out these solutions to carry forward to my customers? And not just looking at traditional technologies, but also looking at emerging technologies. What capabilities could robotics, for example, AI, ML, 5G, and other technologies create that would allow us to build a net new value that our customers have never experienced before? That is the key to making sure your innovations are indeed the market leaders. Because this is another really important thing that the very best innovative organizations are doing, is they're not just doing innovations that are incremental changes to their existing products, but they're investing in a portfolio of innovations similar to what you see listed up here. Beyond just the incremental changes, you do want to make sure that when a digital disruptor has entered your market, that you respond to their digital disruption as fast as you can and not just match what they do. Take your existing value, your existing customer insights and capabilities, and offer a solution that helps to disrupt the solution that has started to disrupt you. The other areas you want to focus on: what are the net new business values that we could achieve that, as I mentioned before, help customers see us as much broader in terms of the value that we provide to them than they have seen in the past. And you don't want to just stay within your vertical market when you think about that. You want to think about, how can I partner with people in other vertical markets, or how can I disrupt the other markets around me with my extended values that I carry forward? And then lastly, I don't want to just be looking at what are my customers going to need in the next year, but you should also be looking at what are your customers going to need 3 to 5 years down the line. And as I look at emerging technologies that are going to take 3 to 5 years to bring to market or to be commercially ready, how can I build out net new solutions known as moonshots that allow me to create a net new value in advance of anyone else doing it, and where customers see tremendous gains that come from that? And what kind of these innovations are most commonly used across most enterprises? As the statistics are, as you see right here, very, very few people are focusing on innovations where they are the market disruptor and where they are creating net new values. But the companies that do this are outgrowing their competitors between 3 and 5x. So if you want to make sure that by 2025 your company is the market leader, this is what you want to prioritize. So to carry forward the conversation, let's talk about what you see as some of the biggest drivers and ways to achieve this kind of innovation success. Go for it.
Okay. Thanks. I think one of the interesting points that you touched upon, right, was about innovation. So at least in our experience, what we have seen in many, first of all, we focus only in emerging markets, okay? That's being part of the World Bank Group, that's what we focus on. And what we have seen with many of our clients is that there is this big push now for digitizing their economies, for the simple reason that developing markets have realized that whatever worked in the past, right, for countries to move from emerging to developed economies is not going to work anymore, right? So it has to do about digitizing their economies, but what very few people realize is that there is no such thing as digital economy without the proper infrastructure in place. And that's where the investments that we make become important, because if we look into real innovation, right, it doesn't occur only if people focus exclusively on the technology aspect, right? The real impact for innovation occurs when there is a confluence, right, of technology meeting society needs, right, and creating new business models. And that's where we believe that we can really make a difference. On something that kind of underlines all of that, right, in many of the markets where we operate, also has to do with creating the market, right? Because if we're talking about some of those emerging economies, that is, let's say, the basic regulatory framework, the background is not there, oftentimes is not there. So one thing that we do very frequently is really work with the governments of different countries, trying to put together that regulatory framework so that the moment that that initial homework is done, right, and private sector companies are prepared to take the risk, right, then that's when we also support them by providing them with seed capital or investment financing or even debt financing at a later stage.
Yeah, and this is a really key point, because so many people are afraid of doing innovations in certain countries or certain states because they find that the governments are going to hinder them. But what you need to do is identify which government agencies are looking to work with you to identify and address emerging customer needs. And we're seeing more and more government agencies who are now focusing on this. And these are the places that those types of innovations will achieve the success. And then the states that fell behind will see, wait, what do you mean this is happening here? Okay, let's change our rules and let's make it happen for us as well. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think I completely agree with Carlos, and I think innovation, it's multiplication between invention and commercialization. I probably think the three very important rules in innovation, especially within AIIB ourselves, we're a new infrastructure investment bank, incoming multilateral development bank, which is intrinsically new. So we constantly ask ourselves these questions, and how do we solve the infrastructure financing gap that today we see? And with 5G and IoT, it's really opening opportunities for digitizing innovation and digitizing infrastructure. So there are really three things that I think are important. The first one is be extremely disciplined on understanding the value propositions. When I mean value propositions in innovation, it doesn't really mean just having some fancy words. You really have to understand your users. Taking solar energy as a very good example, when we talk about value proposition of solar, people instantly come, it's renewable. Yes, but 30 years ago when we first used our solar panel on our Casio calculators that would go into our public exams, it wasn't the reason, it was for the portability. So the more when we actually talk about innovations, it's very dangerous for us to move from that very original ideas of innovation into a doctrines of innovation. And here comes the second point, is keep the first principle. Now, 5G, IoT are very new innovations. There are a lot of lessons that we can learn from the past. We can learn from the success of fintech, e-commerce, media. But there's a limit of that learning and transfer, because in IoT and 5G, we're dealing with very different user types. As you come to try to disrupt or you try to do adjacent industries, you are going into infrastructure sectors, you are dealing with governments, you are dealing with municipalities. Some of the things that we learned for the last 10 years about agile development, design thinking, pivoting, may not actually work here. You cannot pivot your design of a bridge. You cannot agile test your medicines to cure people. So as we go into 5G and IoT, I think that innovation which requires flexibility and versatility, we need to figure out a new way to look at it. And I think this is more important for today's audience and including myself. And last but not least is innovation. Technology is a means, not an end. And also through the process, innovations are technology driven, but technology are driven by intelligent minds. And intelligent minds are driven by people, because it's inside of our heads, and it's driven by incentives. So you may have the best innovation system in the world, but if you do not develop the culture that helps people to think that way, you're not gonna get the technologies that you want. So the innovation really comes to that three things, or at least for the last year when we were developing the digital technology strategy within AIIB, we really look at what the clients want, the values, really think from the first principle, and last but not least, apart from the technology, build a culture for the people who invent and commercialize these and uses it.
Yeah, and in building the culture, this is really important. Innovation needs to be a priority for your entire company. And so make sure that you're driving culture change that embraces it. And don't just have an R&D team that works on the innovations. Allow everyone in your company, including your ecosystem, including your customers, including partners that you work with, to participate in an ideation program where they bring forth ideas about potential innovations and show how they align with evidence of what are the emerging customer needs, what are the emerging changes that are happening, and what are the technologies and how these technologies can be applied. This will give you visibility into the broad set of ideas so that you can verify and validate which ones should be prioritized, which ones align to the 5 different types of innovations I was focusing on, and are these organizations and are these employees willing to not just come up with the idea, but to collaborate and bring these things forward. Because that's really critical. Because as you probably know, employees' biggest concern when they are working at their company is not, did I meet my KPIs? Am I doing the things I was hired for? But am I making a difference? And this is something that if they get to participate in and their ideas get selected and they create new values, now they see way stronger value that they have achieved and want to be much more loyal to your company.
On that, let me just, I'd like to add a couple of thoughts, right? The first one is that if we think about innovation as being a result of technology enabling business models, right, or meeting societal needs, right? By societal needs, we have to think about really the broader society out there, right? And the fact that, and in that sense, I think one cannot overestimate the role that technology can play in terms of inclusion, right? And this is something that has a huge impact. For instance, if we imagine that today there are about 4 billion people in the world connected to the internet, right? And that most of them do that through their mobile devices, through some kind of smartphone, right? And that smartphone only became a reality in 2007 when the Apple iPhone was launched, right? Hey, this is only 13 years, right? And in my experience working in emerging markets, if we see the impact, right, that this kind of connectivity has had on the lives of people in emerging markets, it's mind-boggling, right? I think one of the best examples would be, for instance, what happened in Myanmar, right? As everybody knows, the Myanmar telecom market, the Myanmar market was closed for more than half a century, and it started to be liberalized about in 2012, 2013. And I think very intelligently the government decided that the first sector that they were going to do the reforms was the telecom sector, right? If we see where Myanmar was in 2013, where the mobile penetration rate was less than 1%, right? And today it's already above 100%. The fact that even in the most remote areas of Myanmar, people have access, right, to mobile services, and the impact that it has had in terms of education, access to services, really social inclusion, right? I think this is one of the best examples of technology working for the society, at the same time creating business models that have allowed the economy of the country to explode, to bloom so much.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Totally agree, and I think you need a broader picture from our jobs in infrastructure and for the developing market. There are two observations related to innovation. The first one is, over the last 20 to 30 years, internet, if I may use it in general, representing technologies, really moved from internet of information, that was Google, Yahoo, pre-2000s, to internet of trades, where we had Amazon, Alibaba, into 2005-ish, internet of people, and then we had internet of services. So after internet of all these information, trades, people, services, we're finally getting into something really crucial and difficult. That's Internet of Things and Internet of Values. Now, as an infrastructure investor, I'm really looking into Internet of Things, inorganic things. I'm sure there will be another health tech conference talking about organic things. But either Internet of Value, where you get all the tokenization, blockchain, or Internet of Things, which are about smart cities, making infrastructure more efficient, or Internet of Inorganic Things about biochemistry and digitization, so hard. The key differences is, in the previous 4 iterations, you are innovating with a group of audience who are consumer-driven, who are individuals-driven. It's much easier to push through those changes with agile development in iteration and design thinking. How are you going to use design thinking and agile development when you are dealing with the government and the big procurement or the municipalities, when you are trying to sell a systems of innovations that not only about a digitized or smart light bulbs. You're talking about street lighting system of the whole city. How are you going to ensure it works? So I think that's really important to think about when we move into the new world, when we talk about 5G and IoT, be extremely critical to the changing nature of the innovations and the audience and the receptions of it. And the second point that I want to extend is to create a disruptive revolutions with technology. Either your technology is disruptive or the problem is just too big to ignore. Now, if you are really looking at a big problem, like what Carlos just mentioned, there are a lot of emerging market countries that are lagging behind. You can disrupt, even with the existing technologies. I don't want to quote Rocket Internet or some of the other companies, but sometime a replication of a existing model into new markets like Nigeria, where they created Jumia, or in Pakistan, Duras, which are great examples of how you can create disruptive changes with progressive technologies. And that's the case where your problem is big enough and your market size is big enough. So I think those are the 2 points that I think for us in the telecom industries, or for many of us who are keen to build and lay this foundation, these are something that we just have to consider, and 2020 is the year for that consideration.
Good point. And we've got a few minutes left, and we'd love to take any questions from any of you here in the audience. So feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get the microphone over to you. Over here? All right.
Thank you for the sharing. I have a question about World Bank and also AIB. What you can do to improve the ICT and also the telecom infrastructure in the emerging market, such as Southeast Asia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and Thailand? Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I think this is something that we have been working in the telecom sector for the last 60 years already, right? I mean, the first investment that IFC has done in the telecom sector was actually in the Philippines in the early 70s. Over the years, one thing that we have continued to do, right, is to work with jointly IFC. As I mentioned earlier, I am part of the International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank, right? So what we do is that we work with our World Bank colleagues, right? Because they are the ones that work with governments and market regulators, right, to prepare the regulatory framework, sometimes to build capacity of that regulator to do, let's say, the groundwork, right? So usually what happens is that the World Bank goes first in those markets, does that initial groundwork, and then when the market is prepared, right, for private companies to enter and provide services, that's when IFC comes in. And that's kind of a model that has worked for many years, right? But I think now we are taking one step forward, right? In the sense of this is just not enough. Just working with governments on identifying their existing needs and trying to solve that, right, is really not enough. What we have realized is that in many places we actually have to take a more active role in trying to create a market, in trying to, for instance, let's say that we identified an entrepreneur or some kind of market segment where we don't believe, right, that either the government or the existing private sector has the capacity or has the financial strength or even the interest to develop that part of the business that we believe to be crucial. Right? That's the moment when we can play a more active role trying to nurture those entrepreneurs or even bring people from other markets to invest there. Right? And let's say this kind of upstreaming work is something that we have been very active in doing. And I believe this is really how institutions like IFC and the World Bank can really move the needle.
Good point.
Similar to what Carlos said, we will invest and foster the sector. AIB actually just launched the draft digital infrastructure investment strategy, which is available online, that detailed everything Carlos just said. And because we're a new multilateral development bank with an extra 100 billion, and hopefully that money solely for Asian and for infrastructure will provide more liquidity to good projects, good sponsors, and to finance the needs of new digital infrastructures that are needed in the next 5 to 10 years. So please do have a look on our website and our strategies.
Well, thank you very much. And as you look to go down your innovation paths, clearly engage with these gentlemen, as their organizations can absolutely help you prioritize this. So thanks for your time, and we look forward to the next session.
Good job.